I've been waiting for Fallout 4 for years, wondering what it would be like, and I was surprised that it took me hours to really get into it, days before I felt like I understood what it was trying to accomplish. Fallout 4 is a game that might be easier for people who have never played a Fallout game to get started in than for longtime series fans, because so many of its systems run counter to what a longtime series fan might expect. There's a lot to love about Fallout 4, but you have to adjust your expectations. The moment that sold me on the game, what saved me from a downward spiral of frustration with its difference, was when I came across Walden Pond in the middle of a radiation storm. Sickly light shone through the trees, the sky was poisonous, everything was windswept and hostile. Then there was a museum tour for Henry Thoreau's cabin. In the middle of this crazy storm, the ancient speaker box told me a brief rundown on Thoreau's philosophy of willful distance from civilization. Near it, less than a day's walk from Concord, but living apart from it, living a life of self-reliance and careful study of his environment. Which is maybe how you should play this game, is the part they left out, but should have included. It was a striking moment in the game visually, thematically, and I decided to take the speaker box's advice. It would be better to take pleasure in the individual moments of exploration and beauty than expect meaningful participation in the civilizations of the Commonwealth. If you play Fallout 4 this way, it's relentlessly charismatic. Although I'm disappointed by the game as a long-term Fallout fan, there are ways of adjusting your expectations and streamlining your playstyle to make the awkward systems of the game function a little plainer, the rough edges rub off a little smoother. While the world of Fallout 4 is instantaneously familiar to anyone who's played a Fallout title, or really even watched someone else play a Fallout title, the relationship of the player to the series' traditional design features has changed dramatically. Hating it right out of the box because it's different is the wrong approach. Especially in the combat and the design of the heavy urban areas, Fallout 4 is a tremendous improvement over Fallout 3. It's faster, more responsive, more visually interesting. There are other things that it isn't, compared to other games, previous games in the Fallout franchise, and I've done a separate video for my thoughts on Fallout 4 in relation to the rest of the franchise. In this video, I'm going to be taking the game on its own terms, and try to explain how to make the most out of the myriad changes this title brings to the table. Fallout 4 is a massive game, and it doesn't always come together coherently. In my playthrough, I skipped over entire systems of mechanics until late in the game, simply because I was trying to play Fallout 4 like I played Fallout 3. Don't fall into the same trap I did. Play Fallout 4 like Fallout 4. It makes more sense that way. My biggest initial hurdle isn't really so much of a problem now, getting a decent frame rate. In the first couple of days after release, the game was monstrously inefficient, but patches have tightened the leaky parts of the game engine really well, and I've been able to turn on or up more features almost every patch that Bethesda's released. If you're getting massive slowdowns that fiddling with the aliasing and shadows won't solve, let me give you a huge tip that a subscriber gave me. Turn down God rays. They're the big new lighting mechanic in Fallout 4, and while they're very beautiful and create some stunning moments and images within the game, they are massive performance hogs, and taking them down to medium or low will refund you a lot of frames per second. It's important, I think, for a game this long to run smoothly, and it takes a substantial amount of tweaking to get the game to balance between fidelity and performance. That being said, the lower graphics options don't look terrible by any means, and if you've got to turn some stuff down, the game will still look alright. This isn't like back in Oblivion, where you turn the settings to low and suddenly you're in a swamp of ugly nothing. When you've got that figured out, you've got to think about what kind of character you want. Unfortunately, Fallout 4 doesn't really have the diversity of choice in questing that Fallout 3 and especially New Vegas had. Fallout 4 doesn't really do anything with the idea of traditional builds. And while your attribute distribution will let you get certain skills early on, the higher tiers of that skill are locked until you level up high enough. The top tiers don't really unlock until your late 30s. By that time, you'll have distributed your points into a wide array of other useful things, so while your build matters to your first 10 levels or so, after that, your inventory will determine your success more than anything else, and your build will become pretty spread out across a predictable pattern of useful abilities, like gun nut for weapon modifications or strong back for inventory space. I made a high charisma, high intelligence character, and I felt like a fool for it. I'll talk more about dialogue later on, but it's not a truly useful, viable build like it was in previous games. I spent 8 consecutive levels raising my strength from 2 to 6 and getting the strong back ability up to the second tier. I had to. In Fallout 4, your ability to cart around heaping mounds of junk is more important to your ultimate success than any other metric you can express via the character sheet. When you make a character, you'll have a smaller pool of attribute points than you might want, but don't use them like you would in a traditional role-playing game. Use them with an understanding of their practical application for Fallout 4 specifically. Use your strength for your carry weight, your endurance for hit points, luck for VATs, intelligence for experience gain, perception for aim, agility for action points, and charisma you use for barter prices. Occasionally to solve side quests. But charisma is for caps, and you'll have caps coming out your eyeballs if you can just carry enough junk. There's also an ability in the luck tree, Idiot Savant, that grants you random experience multipliers with increasing frequency the lower intelligence your character has. So, while intelligence does let you level faster, there's that ability to substantially compensate for the lower experience rewards of a low intelligence character. You won't miss having intelligence. There is, to my knowledge, only one quest with a special application for the attribute, and you can still achieve the same quest result without it. Because the modification abilities are level-locked, junk's usefulness and the importance of the crafting system might not be immediately clear. There's very little you can do with the first tier of weapon and armor modifications, so if you're like me, you bypass the junk and sell weapons and sell cigarettes and sell other stuff to vendors for pennies on the dollar like you might in Fallout 3. I spent every cap I made from those transactions and more on crafting materials later on that I could have found in the wild if I had only realized earlier that a microscope is more valuable than a hunting rifle by far. The thing is, by the mid-game, where the third tier of crafting is opened up to you, you'll be able to do a huge range of cool things to a huge range of guns, but only if you have a huge repository of tiny parts to do it with. If you're consistently stashing what you find, building up a reservoir of scrap and junk, then you can use the crafting system with relative ease and freedom. If you just begin to get into it mid-game, it takes hours of play to scrape together what you need for a handful of upgrades. There's a thing within the menus for highlighting components, which will put a magnifying glass icon next to the item in the game world when you come across it if it has a component that you need. Look for aluminum, oil, adhesive, those things you run out of constantly. Adhesive especially. It's pretty much the most valuable thing in Fallout 4, used in every category of modification. Having enough components early on to tinker with your power armor, increase the accuracy and damage of your weapons, and add a little something to your armor's damage resistance is key to surviving the early game experience, but also for getting into the rhythm and spirit of the game. Fallout 4 is all about its primary loop of activities, all of which are about scavenging junk and then using junk. All of these components you're getting, they're for the purpose of making it easier to get more components from more places with tougher enemies, and from the first hour to the 100th, finding duct tape is the primary driving force behind any major exploration. Fallout 4 has a lot of fantastic moments of environmental storytelling, but from a practical perspective, the search for components occupies much more of your time than pursuing side quests or discovering skeleton vignettes. This is a reductive approach to exploration from previous games, but Fallout 4 is kind of slight outside of its major areas of ambition, and the junk crafting system is the area of greatest focus in the game. And it certainly makes sense within the setting. It makes scavenging truly necessary, gives you something meaningful to do with all that junk just lying around in the previous two games. It's hard to deal with the fact that literally all of that junk now has meaningful purpose, though. Inventory management takes up much more of your time, and if you do a dungeon without clearing room in your inventory first, you might be stopping every 10 feet to fiddle with your carry weight, tossing something out, picking something back up. 10 coffee cups, or a fire extinguisher. Fallout 4 has a lot of player choice, but most of that choice is practical, not narrative. Understanding and accepting that the junk loop, and upgrading managing your inventory in general, is the primary rhythm of play for Fallout 4, and that'll really improve the game for you. Start collecting everything you see long before you can use it. When you can use it, you'll need all of it and more. That's the funny thing about applying Thoreau to this game. Even if the individualist spirit applies, there is no separation in this game between yourself and your possessions. The game certainly has the joy of pitching yourself against raw, radioactive nature, but these moments happen in between mad hoarding sprees that are more eclectic and bizarre than any other modern RPG. There's joy in that too, though, and Bethesda worked hard to make this system rewarding and addictive. I also ignored power armor until level 20 just because I didn't think low-level characters ought to have power armor in a Fallout game, and that was also a bit of a mistake. The difficulty of Fallout 4 is notably higher than previous games, the player character more fragile. Power armor is meant to compensate the opposite direction. With a suit of power armor, whose components you can swap out and upgrade anywhere there's a clunky yellow power armor station, you can perform well beyond your level and still kick a lot of ass. So while the fringes of the map are loaded with difficult monsters and difficult firefights, you're not truly cut off from those areas at lower levels. You just can't go there wearing shirt sleeves. By embracing the power armor as the mobile war platform it functions as, you'll be able to better follow your whims as a player, go where you want, loot as you please. So yes, traditionally, power armor has a more conservative role in the franchise, but the demands of Fallout 4's fast-paced, savage gunplay and junk gathering system altered the approach. The implementation perfectly complements the system. Fighting a spike-covered suit of Raider power armor in your own hydraulic rust bucket is supremely satisfying. And fusion cores, the power source for the armor, are relatively plentiful. I had several dozen extra by game's end. I wish I could say I had good advice for the regular armor system, but I don't. I rarely found enough pieces to put together nice sets of full armor appropriate for my level, and I didn't have enough crafting components to upgrade any armor after spending them on weapons and power armor. In 100 hours of play, I changed armor maybe 4 times, not once after level 25. Armor takes up a huge amount of inventory weight, and it's easy to feel like you're many levels behind where you ought to be in terms of regular armor. Although it's the same general idea as power armor, that the armor should be an element of customizable player expression, the result here is way more haphazard, poorly paced within the rhythms of play, and potentially counterproductive to adventuring. That's something to plan for, too. If you go in expecting whole suits of armor that function coherently as a unit, you'll be lost. You really do need to keep track of where your weak points are, left arm, left leg, etc. There are many times that, trying to balance my inventory space, I chucked out a piece of armor that it turned out I needed because I forgot left from right. Armor management is my second least favorite game mechanic that you have to come to terms with in order to get the most out of Fallout 4. My least favorite is settlement management. Very, very early on in the game, right after you get the power armor, you're expected to begin overseeing the construction and expansion of settlements throughout the wasteland. It's another thing I ignored for a long time, but maybe shouldn't have. I put about 60 hours into the game before I did more than the bare minimum of settlement activities. I did that because I was expecting to build my settlement and ally with other independent settlements like Bunker Hill and Goodneighbor. But outside of a half-dozen small towns, the major post-war stronghold, and the faction hubs, there are no truly independent settlements. Once you do a quest for the settlers, the Minutemen, or more accurately you the player, annex the settlement, and it becomes something you need to build out and manage like your first settlement. If you want these new settlements to be vibrant and unique, you need to do the heavy lifting yourself. This is actually pretty great if you can find your way around to getting into the spirit of it. Being able to completely alter so many portions of the main game map permanently truly does make it your world. Admittedly, this is a game design priority from outside the Fallout franchise, but it does work well within it. You scrap the piles of rubble and junk, and in its place you make something living and new. Here's the thing, though. The game is very vague on how all this works, and the menus to do it are profoundly awkward. First, while workbenches are highlighted with quest markers, you don't have to be next to them to use the interface. You never get a view outside your regular camera angles either, so you have to go off a short distance from where you actually want to place a thing, and then you bring up the menu. You have to be next to a thing you want to scrap, and then bring up the menu then to scrap it. And when you scrap items at a bench or in a settlement, those things disappear into the specific inventories of that workbench for that settlement, so you have to remove them and take them with you if you want to use them at another settlement. If you build something and you place it wrongly, you can put it back into the workshop's inventory, close the build menu, reposition your character, open the menu back up, and then replace the building. If that sounds like too many steps, I agree, but the point is you can. There's no reward besides fuzzy feelings and achievement for successfully managing settlements and the functionalities of the things you build, but it's a major part of how your character can actually leave their mark on the world of Fallout 4. Skipping it is skipping a major part of what makes Fallout 4 unique, and it means skipping the opportunity to reshape the wasteland into whatever you really like, within the limits of the settlement build screen menu anyway. If you invest in this mechanic, it's easier to feel invested in the world of Fallout 4 at large. If you take a more practical approach to the value of questing, that'll also do you well. There are some great side quests in the game, and I can think of a half dozen or so pretty readily, but there are also dozens of radiant quests that are constructed randomly from activities and locations. Sometimes it's not immediately obvious which kind of quest is which, although you can bet most quests that are titled Gameplay Problem at Undiscovered Location fall within the radiant quest category. If you hold out for just the complicated quests, you're going to be holding out for a long time. You should use the myriad of smaller, straightforward quests to plan how you travel across the map. If you're visiting faction hubs and settlements on a regular basis and filling up your quest log pretty full, you can connect the dots through a particular region and receive item and experience bonuses for the exploration that you'd already be doing anyway. Quests aren't the in-depth experiences that they used to be. They're fast, they're functional, and they may offer a choice at the end, but most often will not. By seeing them as mechanically helpful and narratively tangential, you'll avoid the feeling that I had, the feeling of frustrated anticipation waiting for a complexity that doesn't show up until the last third to the last quarter of the game. Enjoy everything for what it is at the pace that you feel like unpacking it. Fallout 4 is best in the individual gameplay-driven moment, and when I think back on it, I don't think of particular quests and overarching themes. I think of how the mood of a landscape resonated with me, how the character of a whole region builds as a long sequence of curious diversions, how the most memorable things are those that I didn't even know to expect, but found because I was leisurely picking my way through the environment and letting whim and instinct take the wheel. Those were always some of the best moments in the last two Fallout games as well, but Fallout 4 is a lot denser in how the wasteland is constructed, and also a lot slighter in how the wasteland is written. To appreciate the new ratio of explorative, environmental storytelling to traditional role-playing, you need to adjust your expectations too. There's really a lot to like about Fallout 4 in the exploration, but if you're not willing to take the game as it is, if you're quietly willing it to be the Fallout 4 that you had in your head, you might blow past something amazing without giving it a chance. I say this as a longtime series fan. You're not sacrificing your integrity as a Fallout fan by accepting that Fallout 4 moves away from the franchise roots. You're getting a better value for the $60 that you already threw down on it. The game really works on the level of cyclical, post-apocalyptic scavenging and exploration simulation. It is well deserving of its AAA credentials in that area. It's just the role-playing stuff that's lacking. Adjusting expectations isn't quite enough to get the most out of dialogue, though. If you're like me, it pays to alter your whole approach from the ask all questions, hit all speech challenges method that worked so well in previous Fallout titles. Here, sometimes a question is a question, and sometimes it's a response that moves the conversation forward a tick, and you never know what's what. The trick to Fallout 4 is to not really even ask questions. Dialogue feels better if you answer decisively instead of inquisitively. Otherwise, you find yourself in conversation chains where you're just repeating everything that the NPC just said to you in a quizzical tone and getting the same answer back phrased slightly differently. If you choose one of the other three options, you still usually learn the same information, but the player character seems like they're actually having a real conversation, and the rhythm of the whole thing is a lot better. It's not like you weren't going to do the quest. Even if you refuse a quest, you can always come back later and say yes. Speech challenges are cool when they come up, but you don't need charisma to do a few. The game does a dice roll to see if a speech check succeeds, and since conversations are in real time, you can quick save in a tough conversation the same way you can quick save in a tough firefight. Something to keep in mind about real-time conversations, though, they're frequently interrupted, and if that happens, you can always start over at the beginning. If your traveling companion starts trying to have a serious conversation with you while a deathclaw is sneaking up behind, you can resume that conversation any other time, even if several loading screens pass between when they speak to you and when you decide to finish the conversation. It's kind of a broken system, technically speaking, prone to some janky mix-ups and a lot of bugs, so it's very forgiving about conversations being interrupted. And then my final piece of advice about questing. Follow the main quest for a good bit at first. Each faction you discover and join has a whole array of quests available, some story-related, some radiant. And if you want to tether your exploration to quest completion in the most expansive, dynamic way, the sooner you'll want to discover these factions. You'll know it when it happens. They all make a big production out of you joining. This is the way to do it. When I first played through, I tried going through all the side content first, only to discover that the great majority of side content is concentrated in these half-dozen or so populated quest hubs. The progression from level 10 to level 30 is a very satisfying climb to power, and using quests in a more practical way, with planning routes through the wasteland and getting paid to do what you were already going to do anyway, makes the whole process a lot more rewarding. Just don't expect the quests to be amazing. You'll be pleasantly delighted on the occasions that they are. All in all, there's just too much artistry at work in Fallout 4 to not take it seriously just because it doesn't use the same kind of approach to script writing and player choice as previous titles. Environmentally, it's really quite breathtaking. I think 2015 has been one of the best years of all time for implementation of beautiful environmental lighting in games, from Dying Light to Fallout 4. The way they've crafted the world to look so different and so fantastic at different times of day and night and different weather, the way things are partially randomized and procedurally generated in terms of loot and enemy composition and some quests, in these ways, each playthrough really is distinct, on a moment-to-moment, experiential level. It's a complex simulation, and if you go into the game expecting that, a grand simulation of a mid-century modern apocalypse that you can affect in a range of mechanical ways, you'll get your $60 worth and more. Being branded a Fallout game sets up a lot of expectations considering the roots and legacy of the franchise. Fallout 4 is unmoored from much of it, and appreciating Fallout 4 means leaving some of those things behind as well. It's not my favorite Fallout game, But when people say it's Game of the Year material, well, out of all the games that came out this year, it's a real knockout technical achievement. It's worth approaching in the way that it wants to be approached, the way that it was designed to be approached, and participate in all of its systems. Once, years ago, there was a different Fallout 3, an Interplay sequel, with a project named Van Buren. It intended to include settlement building mechanics as well, in addition to the isometric tabletop traditions. That game never happened. Fallout New Vegas happened. And it's fantastic that franchise fans got that. It's a huge, truly huge game in scope and ambition. Van Buren is a kind of phantom lurking in the back of a lot of fans' minds. The Fallout they want, the Fallout I want, a missing game that was never concretely defined, so that each fan paints in their own details. Fallout 3 veered so far away from Fallout 1 and 2 that a lot of people, the No Mutants Allowed folks most prominently, never really forgave Bethesda for it. I was on board for a lot of what Fallout 3 did, and New Vegas ultimately was what I wanted all along out of a classically influenced Fallout title. But, like a phantom, the lingering presence of Van Buren, the theoretical perfect Fallout game, keeps the living mired in the past. Fallout traditionalists never got Van Buren, and never will, but we already got our contemporary traditional hybrid Fallout with New Vegas. Bethesda owns Fallout now. Fallout 4 is Bethesda's vision of the franchise, no one else's. For better or worse, this is where we're at with Fallout in 2015. The game has many moments of real wonder and real creativity. They're just all framed through these mechanical, experiential systems. As a fan, I can mourn Van Buren, or I can play Fallout 4, and I already paid for Fallout 4. Thanks for watching.
My ability to do these videos is based a lot on the generosity of people who contribute to me through the website Patreon. I want to thank by name a lot of the people who are currently giving $10 a month or over to me through the service. People like Aaron Albuck, B-Tree, Noah Duggins, Martin Karsten, Galak, Brett Gialmo, Martin Skenning, Finn Spencer, Lars Ingvar Anderson, Colin, Brad Carr, Ivan Marinov, Josh Parks, Aiden AK-47, Dewey, Anax of Rhodes, Niels Bachfrummer, Spyro Sideris, Matthew Lagden, Cameron, Tizar Vakarian, Connor Biblo, Brad Wallace, Ryan Gunst, Preston Allen, Sigmund Copperwood, Stephen Lark, Amir Aguilar, Jeffrey Knudsen, Pontus Pfaffenstill, Chris Larkey, Kimmo Heikkinen, Joe Wolf, Sangustin, Oliver Hendliken, Sill, Jonathan Flarkener, Harley McAvoy, Joshua Beebe, Josh, David Gilbreth, Sergio, Dan Reeder, Irvin, Dylan Sibley, Rob Clark, Alexander Heavens, D, Carl Gleason, Yuri Pednes, Todd Martin, Paul Cocker, Warren, Cameron Jackson, David Fry, David Reed, Boris Nielsen, Michael Atwell, Alexander Leister, Trolls Katzberg Sigbert, I Cannot Fly, Philip Matheron, Eugene Watson, Leslie M., Jake Brennan, Ken Young, Dalton Seiler, Balder Carlson, Pat Hay, Soeb Sheik, Ron Gervais, Christian Zacharianson, Comfy Hat, Cassie, Jump Kick Punch, Andreas Larson, Matthew Zender, Bradley Smith, White Zero, Tim Marsh, Jared Meyer, Andrew Steele, Igor Babyuk, Niles D. McDonald, Seth Downing, Justin Hughes, Kumaran Vijayan. I'm sorry, man, I screw up your name almost every time. Nobody, Dennis Clark, Matthew Reed, Nick Cole Hamilton, Kevin DeBolt, Andrew Foltz, and many others who are contributing at less than $10 a month. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch the videos, and I especially appreciate people who help contribute to the production of them. Thanks again.
The heavy urban areas, Fallout 4 is a tremendous improvement over Fallout 3. It's faster, more responsive, more visually interesting. There are other things that it isn't, compared to other games, previous games in the Fallout franchise, and I've done a separate video for my thoughts on Fallout 4 in relation to the rest of the franchise. In this video, I'm going to be taking the game on its own terms, and try to explain how to make the most out of the myriad changes this title brings to the table. Fallout 4 is a massive game, and it doesn't always come together coherently. In my playthrough, I skipped over entire systems of mechanics until late in the game, simply because I was trying to play Fallout 4 like I played Fallout 3. Don't fall into the same trap I did. Play Fallout 4 like Fallout 4. It makes more sense that. Fox's advice. It would be better to take pleasure in the individual moments of exploration and beauty than expect meaningful participation in the civilizations of the Commonwealth. If you play Fallout 4 this way, it's relentlessly charismatic. Although I'm disappointed by the game as a long-term Fallout fan, there are ways of adjusting your expectations and streamlining your playstyle to make the awkward systems of the game function a little plainer, the rough edges rub off a little smoother. While the world of Fallout 4 is instantaneously familiar to anyone who's played a Fallout title, or really even watched someone else play a Fallout title, the relationship of the player to the series' traditional design features has changed dramatically. Hating it right out of the box because it's different is the wrong approach, especially in the combat and the design of I've been waiting for Fallout 4 for years, wondering what it would be like, and I was surprised that it took me hours to really get into it, days before I felt like I understood what it was trying to accomplish. Fallout 4 is a game that might be easier for people who have never played a Fallout game to get started in than for longtime series fans, because so many of its systems run counter to what a longtime series fan might expect. There's a lot to love about Fallout 4, but you have to adjust your expectations. The moment that sold me on the game, what saved me from a downward spiral of frustration with its difference, was when I came across Walden Pond in the middle of a radiation storm. Sickly light shone through the trees, the sky was poisonous, everything was windswept and hostile. Then there was a museum tour for Henry Thoreau's cabin. In the middle of this crazy storm, the ancient speaker box told me a brief rundown on Thoreau's philosophy of willful distance from civilization. Near it, less than a day's walk from Concord, but living apart from it, living a life of self-reliance and careful study of his environment. Which is maybe how you should play this game, is the part they left out, but should have included. It was a striking moment in the game visually, thematically, and I decided to take the speaker box away. My biggest initial hurdle isn't really so much of a problem now, getting a decent frame rate. In the first couple of days after release, the game was monstrously inefficient, but patches have tightened the leaky parts of the game engine really well, and I've been able to turn on or up more features almost every patch that Bethesda's released. If you're getting massive slowdowns that fiddling with the aliasing and shadows won't solve, let me give you a huge tip that a subscriber gave me. Turn down God Rays. They're the big new lighting mechanic in Fallout 4, and while they're very beautiful and create some stunning moments and images within the game, they are massive performance hogs, and taking them down to medium or low will refund you a lot of frames per second. It's important, I think, for a game this long to run smoothly, and it takes a substantial amount of tweaking to get